Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the not so imaginatively titled Roadhouse 2, which emerged direct to video no less than 17 years after the film to which it is a nominal sequel. Our protagonist this time is Shane Tanner, the son of James Dalton, who we are informed is now deceased, murdered by persons unknown. Now, Tanner is a DEA agent, but when his uncle Nate is attacked and hospitalized, the young man blows off this job, ditches his complaining boss, and drives down to Louisiana to take over running his uncle's bar until Nate can get back on his feet. Now, if you're thinking that once Tanner gets there, he's going to run into a local bad guy of some kind, which will inevitably lead to having some kind of explosive showdown involving lots of mano-a-mano action, well, you're exactly right. If you further think that all of this conflict may somehow tie back to the murder of his father, correct again. On the other hand, if you're thinking that running out on the DEA without permission should get Tanner in at least some kind of trouble, well, you may be confused about the kind of movie you're watching. This is very much a cheesy action film. Stuff like paperwork and contractual obligations and the laws of physics are very much not welcome here. Which is not in and of itself a problem, of course. We watch films like this for escapist entertainment, not for the complexities of real life. The real question to consider is whether the movie is fun to watch. Contemporary critics didn't much think so, calling this film mindless and silly and recommending rewatching the original 1989 movie instead, which is ironic given that critics hadn't much liked that film either when it came out. Despite its poor critical reception, though, the original Roadhouse did decent business at theatres. It was, after all, made at a time when leading man Patrick Swayze was hot box office property. It also went on to become a big hit on home media and over time gathered something of a cult following. And perhaps said cult following included some of the people behind the sequel, or perhaps they simply wanted to cash in on the name recognition, or perhaps it was just easy to license the rights to a sequel, or again, perhaps, as with the first Starship Troopers movie or the horror film named Fantasy Island a few years ago, they had a script that they realised could be rewritten to fit an existing franchise, so they did so. I'm not sure what motivated this, but let's talk about the film itself. And whatever the reasons for the film being made, in its final form, the script for Roadhouse 2 regularly riffs on and calls back to the original movie. It does this in ways both big, the basic plot outline is more or less the same, up to and including the love interest with a personal connection to the bad guy, and in small ways, with a number of specific callbacks to individual scenes or lines of dialogue from the Patrick Swayze movie. And yes, those references absolutely include a recitation of Dalton's 3 rules. Now, how many of the smaller references you'll notice probably depends on how well you know the original film or how recently you've seen it. On which subject, I think it would be fair to say that the experience of viewing Roadhouse 2 is likely improved by rewatching the original movie shortly before diving into this film. If nothing else, it may remind you of some of the first movie's shortcomings and make you more tolerant of the shortcomings of this one. I do also wonder if all of these hey, remember this from the first movie moments are a deliberate attempt to gloss over the sudden invention of a family for Dalton. Shane's clearly in his late 20s, so assuming both films are set roughly when they were released, he would have been about 10 years old at the time of the original film. So where was he in that film? Why does Dalton not mention him? And the answers, of course, are probably nowhere and he didn't exist yet because a hero who was presumably divorced and also an absentee father wasn't in the 1989 plan. He's just been retconned into existence. Another way in which this sequel echoes the original film is that, like that movie, Roadhouse 2 is a big old ball of cheese. However, whereas part of the original film's charm, or at least for me, comes from its seeming obliviousness to how goofy it often is, this one feels much more purposely schlocky and cheesy. There's a definite air of winking to the camera about this movie. Now, sometimes that's not such a big deal. I am almost always happy to watch Jake Busey chew scenery as a bad guy, which he does with consummate glee. But other times it does feel a little bit forced. That never happened in the original film. Roadhouse was deeply, deeply cheesy, like a quattro formaggi with extra mozzarella, but it felt fully authentic in its over-the-top silliness. That's not the case here, and the not-so-subtle winks to the camera may put some viewers offside. It didn't do that for me. On the whole, I found the movie sufficiently good-natured and about its own deliberate schlockiness that I felt that there was a sense of affection for the original material here, unlike in the case of certain Hollywood remakes that basically seemed to be mocking the source material. But that was only my feeling, and other viewers may not get the same sense of affection. They may dislike that feature of the film more than I did. Now, one area where Roadhouse 2 definitely does diverge from its progenitor is in its hero. The original film presents Dalton as spiritually tortured. Well, he's basically a decent guy. He's let his anger get the better of himself in the past, and he remains more afraid of stepping over the line again than he is of anything else. Certainly, he's much more worried about that than he is about the direct physical threat presented by his enemies. Now, that whole aspect of Dalton's character is a fairly thin thread in the original film. In fact, it functions mostly as just another obstacle that Dalton must overcome so he can win the day and settle down into love and contentment. But it's still a thread, and one that Scott Tanner is missing. Tanner's just a straight-up hero doing hero-type things. The closest he sells to angst is his unresolved ambition to find out who killed his father. Ultimately, though, this film profits from more modern fight choreography. Roadhouse 2, though, is a shallower, less sincere homage to its flawed but interesting inspiration. You should probably only check it out if you're a fan of the original film and want to play Spot the Callback. Next time, ding ding, round 3. I tackle this year's Roadhouse remake starring Jake Gyllenhaal.